My name is Mireille Bejjani. I use she or they pronouns. I work for Slingshot and I'm the co-executive director. I'd say what gives me energy is working with people, both my coworkers and the community groups I work with. I work with a lot of residents of all kinds from all different communities across Massachusetts and across the region. They are so driven, so motivated to protect their communities from pollution and build healthier, cleaner, better future for not just their community, but the world. And showing up alongside them day after day is such a reminder of the power we're building, and it's energizing to be doing that. As a community organizer, I work alongside residents who are facing pollution threat of some kind, and I help them put together a campaign, a plan to fight back and win to eliminate that threat, whether that's a pipeline or a power plant or a landfill or an incinerator. Communities are dealing with all kinds of polluting infrastructure, stuff that's been around for a long time or stuff that's new and being proposed. So I help them think through what's their goal, what do they want to accomplish, who can give that to them, and how do they make that happen? And then how do they get their neighbors and their whole community building power together to accomplish that, to close a power plant, to stop a new landfill proposal? It's a lot of running meetings and thinking through who holds the power in a situation and how do we get them to use that power in a way that benefits the community and the public interest, and that gets us closer to the goal that the community has outlined for themselves and for their future. A big part of my lived experience is being Lebanese American and growing up visiting my family in Lebanon every year. And I lived there for a year in high school. That informs a lot of my organizing. Being in Lebanon, I feel like there are a few key pieces that I pull out of that. One is the importance of communities leading the way on the solutions that work best for them. It's the case in Lebanon and also here that elected officials or folks, the bigger you get in scale, the less of a sense you have of what really is best for the folks on the ground. In Lebanon, that has looked like people figuring out solar power for themselves to get off of diesel generators and to deal with an electric system that it has become more and more unreliable, or finding other solutions truly at a municipal level where the federal government is unresponsive, is corrupt, is just not in touch with what their constituents are asking for. Another piece of it, resilience, that I think comes up time and time again all around the world, coming out of natural disasters of all kinds, coming out of catastrophes. In Lebanon, that was the Beirut 2020 port explosion that was a recent big flashpoint, and seeing people pull themselves back up and rebuild their communities themselves because government or other systems are nowhere to be found. This idea of resilience, I think, often gets glorified and venerated, and it is so admirable, and it's something that I'm so proud of, that I've seen my own family and friends have that resilience time and time again, and the same with the communities I work with in Massachusetts and across the Northeast. And it's so tremendous that they have that courage and that resilience and that strength. But it's also, I really try to remember my organizing that shouldn't be the norm. That shouldn't be something that, because we are proud of that, we're leaning into it instead of trying to eradicate it, because people shouldn't have to be resilient. We should have systems in place, systems of care, of support, sustainable networks, electricity, government, etc., that means that people don't have to dig into that well of resilience because they're not being knocked down to begin with. That's a huge thing I think about in my work, is how do we move towards people's ability to rebuild no longer being necessary. It's a roller coaster in organizing and working in community and working on campaigns that can take a really long time to see big success. And remembering that, having that perspective when you're in, especially when you're in the lows, when the roller coaster takes a pronounced dip, when a situation turns for the worse, a decision comes down from a state agency that isn't what you were hoping for, or the community group has a setback, remembering that there are lots of ups and downs, and things can change very quickly in the organizing world. One decision, one news story, one action can really shift the momentum. And so that, the more I'm in this work, the more I've seen how much the ups and downs come and go, and how how they can average each other out to a net positive direction that our organizing is taking us in. So trying to hold that perspective especially when things don't go as we plan. Well, I think energy is everywhere. Electricity is something we rely on every day, for most of the day, not the whole day. I have a light on in my room right now because it's a cloudy day and there isn't as much light outside. I rely on energy for cooking food and washing my clothes and just kind of going about my day. It's an integral part of my community, of my households. Can't really get by without it. There are a few different reasons that I think climate impacted communities should be leading the way. One is circling back to what I was saying before in terms of communities know what's best for them. I think that is really true in this situation, where they are the experts on their own experience. They are the experts on what has happened historically in their community, on what solutions could work better or worse given the local parameters. Every community is different politically, in terms of landscape, in terms of energy needs. And so having communities be able to shape that is going to lead to the solutions that are most effective for communities themselves. Another piece of it ties into my values and my worldview kind of more broadly, where a priority for me in the energy transition is to not repeat the patterns of the fossil fuel industry in a few different ways. One is making sure that infrastructure isn't disproportionately impacting some communities over others, the way fossil fuel infrastructure does, primarily hurting Black, Indigenous, people of color, and poor communities, their frontline communities. So that's a big thing that we don't want to replicate in building out the clean energy industry. There are going to be impacts, so making sure those impacts aren't disproportionately on the shoulders of already impacted communities. This is an opportunity as we're rebuilding a huge system. How do we share power better? Not just the actual power of like electrons that we're sending around, but the power of influence and control over the system. How do we not have that held in the hands of the few who are benefiting from the energy that we're building, and then having communities continue to get the short end of the stick? Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said this at the climate march in New York a little while ago. We don't want to go from oil barons to solar barons. Pins that idea of, we don't, centering climate impacted communities helps us think about how do we make sure that influence and accountability is widespread, and that we are doing what is truly best in the public interest and not what's going to make the biggest profit for the businesses that are steering the ship. I think it is pretty similar. Community-led energy to me means that people are part of the decision-making process around their energy grid. They're part of figuring out what the electric system should look like for them, for their needs. I think it also looks like people being active parts of the grid. I talk about the grid as, it's the technical piece and the infrastructure piece of wires, transmission lines, power plants, solar panels, etc. but it's also the human piece of those who are making decisions, those who are paying electric bills and receiving electrons, to those who are impacted by where those power plants and transmission lines and solar panels go. And so I think community-led energy is thinking about that human side of it and leveraging the fact that we have millions of users across our region here in the Northeast who tap into our grid every day, and they can be a tool in our toolbox, just like building out solar panels or offshore wind. How can we mobilize ratepayers and customers themselves to be part of this clean energy solution in terms of increasing their energy efficiency or cutting down on their demand during peak times, or generally being an engaged and informed part of this system, so that just like the wires and the power plants and the solar panels, they can be part of the solution and the clean energy and the clean energy infrastructure that we are moving towards as we're getting off of fossil fuels. A just world, to me, looks like where a lot of these things that I've been describing exist, in terms of communities really being empowered to lead the way on what is beneficial to them, on shaping the clean energy future and all the other parts of our future as well, where resilience is not imposed on particularly communities who have had to build back time and time again, where instead everybody is supported and has a genuinely equitable chance at a healthy and sustainable life. I hope that we can get there. I think something I talk a lot about in the clean energy transition and in avoiding repeating the mistakes of the past is that there's a lot of distrust as a result of how things have happened for years, where communities have been lied to by state agencies, by companies. They've been impacted time and time again. There's no trust in that relationship as a result, including, there's a lot of distrust in a lot of the entities that are supposed to keep us safe, that are supposed to enforce regulations, like departments of environmental protection or the EPA or other entities. And so I think a really big part of this transition for anyone who's engaging in it, to not just say, oh, we're leaving behind everything that came before and we're doing this new thing now instead. There needs to be a transition from one to the other, an acknowledgement of what came before in order to pave the way for what's coming next. We need to address the lack of trust and the harmful relationships that have permeated the landscape for so long, in order to allow stronger, trusting relationships to unfold instead. We can't just kind of say it's the end of this chapter and then we're starting a new one, because that's not how people work. They don't just forget everything that came before. Key part of how we move forward is, how do we acknowledge history, integrate not repeating it into the steps that we're taking now.